Welcome back to another episode of PB Ballers. Today, Jason and I are so pleased to be joined by the one, the only, the legend, the OG of Korean football writers, Steve Han. Round of applause for Steve.
Hey,
How you doing,
that's
Steve?
embarrassing. That's embarrassing, but I'll take it. Thank you. No, thanks for having me, guys. Like, what you guys do is really cool. Yeah, so thanks for having me. It's gonna be fun.
Steve, it's always a honor and privilege to have you on the show. Uh, Figured, we'll jump right into it. There's been a lot going on, regarding the Korean national team, our manager, our players. We have a new manager. He's an interim, Hwang Sun-hong. I want to hear your initial thoughts on him. Why him? And is there another name you might have preferred over him?
Well, I mean, this is like a two-part question, though, right? Because I don't think anybody's pleased with what's going on. But like, you kind of have to break it up, though. Like, are you really angry at Hwang Sun-hong being the interim manager? Or are you angry at the situation that led to this? Or are you angry at the situation that led to this? You know what I mean? I think it's two very different situations. But, I mean, I think the fact that they put Hwang Sun-hong there in that position, especially like not even a week after they booked these games in Saudi Arabia for the under-23 team, I mean, it just shows you where the or from an organization standpoint, it kind of shows you where they are. And, and you look at the Asian, the under-23 Asian Cup that's in April. I mean, that's going to be the Olympic qualifying for this team. And that's not going to be an easy tournament because you have to finish in the top 3 to go to the Olympics. And the Olympics are very important for Korean football. It's probably more important for Korea than probably any other country, to be honest. And if they don't go to the Olympics, which honestly is a possibility. I mean, you look at the way they played at that tournament last time around 2 years ago. They were knocked out by Japan. It was a 3-0 loss. And they're in the group with Japan, China, UAE. That's not going to be easy. And just the fact that, and once they get past the group stage there, it's the quarterfinals, it's the semifinal. It's going to be tough. And the fact that that team will be missing their head coach because of these pair of games that, I mean, Korea could afford to lose to Thailand, the senior team. They could afford to drop one game to Thailand and they'll still be okay. I mean, it won't be the worst thing to happen to them. So I think the fact that they're taking this risk is what kind of, like, I just don't understand. I don't think anybody truly really understands. I don't think you guys understand either, to be honest. But I guess another thing is, like, it's just weird to me. It's just the fact that they seem very reluctant to bring outsiders into their organization. That's the way I feel about this situation, the way I look at it. Because, I mean, there's honestly no risk involved. I mean, you look at the technical committee right now, and they have coaches there as members of the technical committee who don't have jobs right now. So this job could easily go to one of them. This could easily go to Chung Hae-sung himself. I mean, he was a head coach himself. They obviously don't want to put themselves in that position, but they also don't want to bring an outsider to take that seat temporarily. So they're bringing someone from within who has a very big tournament coming up in less than 2 months. So it's, it kind of shows you, the way I feel about it, honestly, it looks to me like there's something that they're trying to hide. But I think we all know what they're trying to hide. It's the fact that they're a mess as an organization. I mean, right now, when you look at the national team, they don't even have a proper training base. You guys realize that, right? They lost Paju, guys. Like, when this team was put together in December to prepare to go to the Asian Cup, while they were in Korea, they couldn't train outdoor. They were training indoor at their team hotel. It was only when they flew to the UAE they were able to do proper training. I mean, that's how sad this situation is right now. So I don't think they want any outsiders to experience any of that, right? Even as an interim coach.
So you mentioned the technical committee. Chung Hae-sung is the man who was appointed to help find the interim candidate. Now, I don't know if these reports are true, but from what I saw, media reports in Korea said that the KFA committee was set to discuss a possible interim yesterday when Chung Hae-sung burst into the room and announced that Hwang Sun-hong's hiring had been finalized out of nowhere. That reportedly led to committee members being angry. Some of them apparently got into a shouting match with Mr. Chung, but then by the end of the meeting, they had to back down and listen because apparently this came from the top dog. So, I mean, Steve, I know you talked about this a bit, but how worried should we be that we have a child at the top of the KFA making these kinds of decisions by himself?
It's not. I'm not laughing at what you said. I'm just laughing at that situation, because that whole rumor about how they got into a shouting match or whatever. So I mean, I heard about that too, and the way I heard it was, it wasn't so much that it was like an argument, but there was some level of opposition within the KFA who, like, the people who didn't agree with Hwang Sun-hong being named the interim coach. So I think that's where this argument, if you can call it that. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know what exactly happened. I only heard. But I mean, that again, like, shows you, because not too long after that discussion, apparently they made the official announcement as him being the interim head coach. So it's that situation to me is, honestly, it's so sad that it's funny. Like, because I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, you asked how worried we should be. I mean, like, seems to me like you guys have been worried just as much as I have. It's a mess. I mean, you talked about Chung Hae-sung. I mean, let's talk about him. Like, I mean, let me ask you guys a question. Like, what do you guys know about Chung Hae-sung?
For me, based on, what I was looking through his profile when we were preparing for some of our videos, he was the assistant coach for KFA Hiding. He was the assistant coach. He was an assistant coach under the KFA for a while. So like you said, he's familiar with the organization. And this just feeds into the narrative, that maybe the KFA prefers to have people who've worked in the organization for a long time, and they don't like to bring in outsiders. I know that briefly he had a stint out in Vietnam, maybe in Ho Chi Minh, as a head coach. And then he's been, just more of a part of the technical committee for the KFA. That's the extent of my knowledge, at least.
For me, I know, as Jason said, he's been part of the KFA's quote-unquote family since Jason and I were kids, all the way back to, the 2002 World Cup. And then I recently looked at his resume. Like Jason said, the last coaching stint I think he had was pre-COVID over in Vietnam. Before that, I see he was also a technical director at a high school in South Korea at Chungang Godeongakyo. So, I mean, okay, not the worst resume. He definitely has experience in Korea, but I think, Steve, you told me this before, but it seems like almost he's just a yes man or a puppet for Chung Mong-gyu.
Yeah, so here is the thing. This is what makes me sad. Like, this is when it becomes, like, no longer funny to me. Like, seriously, because when you look at somebody like Chung Hae-sung, like, I mean, you saw him. You guys saw him in the presser, right? Like, he's not the most eloquent person, and I mean, having known him as a coach, because he was a head coach in the K League too, way back in the days. Like, having known him as a coach and having watched some of his teams, he is actually a good coach. I mean, he was a head coach of Bucheon SK, the team that predates Jeju United, and that was actually a very good team when that team was under him. From what I remember, I was quite young back then too. But another thing about that is 2002 World Cup, he was one of the head assistant coaches for KFA Hiding, and 2010 World Cup, he was the head assistant coach under Heo Jung-moo when Korea went to the last 16 for the first time on outside of Korea. He's actually something of a legend in Korean football. Like, he's somebody who should be celebrated. Like, he's somebody who should be respected, but it's just he's just not suited to become a technical director, because I mean, officially his job title is not technical director, but that's pretty much what it is. That's the role that he is at least supposed to be playing. You guys understand that his job right now as the head of the technical committee is not a full-time position. Like, he does not report to the KFA on a daily basis. You could take this position and, I mean, it seems like a very important position, and it should be, because a role of a technical director should be very important for any country, for any federation. But for Korea, that's where the level of the KFA really is. They don't have a full-time technical director. And Chung Hae-sung is actually, like I said, he's somebody who should be celebrated. And he's probably somebody who should be in coaching education at the KFA, building relationships with coaches and local youth leagues and things like that. That role probably suits him perfectly. You put him in a position where he's pretty much set up to fail, because is he the decision maker? By KFA regulation, he's not even allowed to do that. Like, he cannot make a decision without Jung Mong-gyu's signature. Like, he is being put in a position where he's pretty much acting as the shield for the KFA. So like that's what makes me sad, because here's somebody who is quite old now, and he should be celebrated. He should be respected, especially by the younger generation. And I don't blame some of the younger people for thinking that this man is just some, random guy who just showed up one day and just became a puppet for the KFA. Like, they can very much think that when like, you guys had to look him up, right? Like, to actually get to know some of the things that he's done. The only thing he can do is to be criticized. I mean, like, did you guys see that presser where he was like, "Oh, I'll be responsible if something goes wrong"? Like, what responsibility can he really take? And like, what does it really mean when he says, and can you really hate on him for saying such a thing? Because he's only saying that because, first of all, he's not very eloquent. That's number one. There's no knock on him. That's just the way he is. And number two, he just doesn't know what to say because the organization doesn't have a plan, and he's being put in a position to represent an organization after being put in that position like a couple of days ago. That's the reality of this situation. So when you unfold some of these things, you actually, like, what you're left is with, like, at first you get angry, and then it kind of like becomes, oh, like, this is actually sad.
So Steve, I noticed, a lot of parallels between what you mentioned about Song Hye-sung and Hwang Sun-hong as well. Two guys that are being placed in positions where it seems like they're being set up to fail. And really, Hwang Sun-hong is a guy that, like you said about Chung Hye-sung, he's a guy that should be celebrated. Of course, everyone knows about his achievements as a player for the Korean national team. And then even as a manager, the U23 team did have up and down performances, but at the end of the day, Hwang Sun-hong led this team to gold in military sense, especially for guys like Kang-in, Lee Han-bum, Park Jin-sub, etc. What do you think about Hwang Sun-hong? For me, I think he deserves a little bit of the blame because I feel like he could have declined his position. For me, I think he has a professional obligation to put 100% effort into Olympic qualifying, considering how important this is.
Hwang Sun-hong, like the KFA, I think we all have to kind of understand that they run very much like a company. If you're a KFA employee, which a head coach of the under-23 national team, is, it's sort of like you're one of the employees, and whatever they ask you kind of becomes another item as part of their scope of work, if that really makes sense. So that was the problem with Paolo Bento, to be honest with you, because the KFA wanted Bento to run seminars, to be more to proactively meet more coaches, to be a part of the coaching education. They wanted him to be a part of all that, but Bento's position was, I'm the head coach of the national team. We'll go to the World Cup. I need to. That's my job. But the KFA's position was, you're in a position where you're the head coach of the national team as a KFA employee, and we're asking you to do these things. But I mean, and I'm not sure if he's done none of it or he's done some of it or what the agreement was. I'm not sure what any of that stuff was, but I do know that there was some dispute there. So, as a domestic coach, whether you're Hwang Sun-hong or whether you're a head coach, working at a KFA as one of the instructors with no playing background, no matter who you are, if you're employed by the KFA and they come to you and ask you to be in charge of the national team for 1 week and a half, it's very hard for them to say no. So I do think we have to understand that a little bit, but I do understand what you're saying in the sense that if he genuinely tried to understand the situation, the right thing for him to do was probably to say, hey, like, I got the under-23 team to focus on. But I'm quite sure it was very difficult for him to say that. And, going back to Chung Hye-sung was his coach in 2002 when they went to the semifinal of the World Cup together. So there's that relationship. And Chung Hye-sung is somebody who was pretty much forced to be in his position. Hwang Sun-hong is someone who is being forced to be in his position right now. So it was them too who had this conversation. Did any one of those two really have a say in this? Like, going back to Hwang Sun-hong, and it's hard for me to criticize him. I'm gonna be honest. Like, it's hard for me to criticize him. I mean, that doesn't mean I won't criticize him when, like, when Korea got knocked out of the under-23 Asian Cup in the quarterfinals, they lost 3-0 to Japan. Like, I was on him, but it's hard for me to just like be angry at him. You know what I mean? Because he was my legend. Like growing up in Korea in the 90s, he was the guy. Like I think a lot of people, like especially a lot of the younger people. I mean, I'm still pretty young too, but a lot of the younger people, they don't quite understand the magnitude of his stardom. The kind of stardom that he enjoyed in the 90s. When he went down with that ACL injury, like prior to 98 World Cup, right just before the tournament, it was heartbreak for the entire fan base. Heartbreak. I mean, he had a lot of haters too, but I mean, Son Heung-min has a lot of haters right now in Korea. So like this is Korea we're talking about. Yeah, so it's hard for me, man. And then to see him come back from that in 2002 and scoring that goal to give Korea the first ever win at a World Cup. I mean, I have his jersey. I have his jersey right there in my closet. I don't even take it out because I don't like, I don't like too much light hitting it. Like seriously, I'm trying to protect this, so I keep it where it's dark. That's the kind of presence he is to me. So it's really hard for me to really like go at him. You know what I mean? But like to be fair, as a coach, it's been a struggle for him the last few years. I mean, the Asian Games it was great, but hey, like the bare minimum at that tournament in terms of expectation was to win it. Really, like because not many teams take that tournament seriously. And like if you're Korea, you go to that tournament to win it. It's like you either win or it's a complete disaster. Because you're pretty much running the risk of restricting an entire generation of players. But I mean, he got that done. Like, I mean, credit to him. Like, the job got done. I mean, they didn't play the greatest football, but it's also hard for him because that team got put together very last minute. I mean, Son Heung-woo like joined that team after playing like a pair of friendlies in England. And like he joined that team like way late, like way deep into the training camp. But I mean, they got the job done. So I mean, give him credit for that. But in terms of some of the other coaching situations that he was in like the last like 8 years, then the problem for him was dealing with big personalities, especially like his time at FC Seoul. I think a lot of people actually predicted that he'd be successful there. But I mean, he won a title in his first season. Like, I mean, it was a bit of a fortunate title for him, but he did win it. But since then, it was just complete downhill, and he had some clashes with players too. He just had problems dealing with big personalities, and obviously at national team level. I mean, this is an interim position, so I'm sure it's a lot different. But that could be problematic. But I mean, I spoke with Chung Sang-bin like a couple of weeks ago. I mean, he was all about Hwang Sun-hong. Like he really likes it. He was like, he told me something that not many players told me. He was like, he always listens to the players. Like he's very respectful when he talks to me, and like I didn't hear a lot of that about him before that.
Well, let me kind of piggyback off what you said about Hwang Sun-hong, because I tweeted about one of his former players, Dejan Damjanovic, who was a pretty big legend in the K-League, and he talked about how Hwang Sun-hong had good ideas tactically, but he had no idea how to manage, and that it seemed like with him, he had a problem with the foreign players. So maybe Steve, he just has an easier time with the Korean guys, and maybe it's a cultural language barrier. He just can't get along with some guys who speak English. Maybe
I think that's a very valid point, because when he won the K-League with Pohang, I mean, you guys know he won it without any foreigners on that team. I mean, that's a pretty legendary achievement in and of itself. I mean, you kind of have to give him credit for that, like in a different way. Going back to that whole criticism about his struggle with managing big personality, because Daehan's a huge personality, especially in Asian football. And then, you go back and look at some of the situations that he had with Park Ju-young at FC Seoul. I mean, that was a problem too. And Park Ju-young, at the time was a big star. So yeah, I mean, I do think Daehan's criticism, especially, because Daehan did concede that he's a good tactician, but that his lack of man management skills kind of just like negated all of that. But it's hard to defend Hwang Sun-hong too as a coach, because and then he went on to Daejeon, where he was given a lot of resources to rebuild that team. And it didn't go well, man. Like I was rooting for the guy. I really was. I was really rooting for him. But like it just didn't work out.
Steve, moving back to the national team, whether we like it or not, Hwang Sun-hong is the manager. How do you see the two games against Thailand playing out? And do you expect him to go with the roster that we took to the Asian Cup in Qatar, or could there be a few new faces that we see? Park Yoo out, maybe Ikiji out, and someone else in? What do you think?
Like, I mean, right now it's all speculation, right? Because we don't even know who the coaching staff for this team. That's another thing. Like, they're gonna put together a coaching staff for this team, and then they're gonna get disassembled after like these 2 games. Like, how does that how does that even how do they even get paid for that? Like, I really like, out of personal curiosity, I just want to know. Like, if I were to speculate, I don't think he makes too many changes, to be honest, because it's just weird for an interim manager to come in and to make like wholesale changes in the squad like that. That's kind of wild, you know. So I think he goes with most of the player who I think maybe he takes a group of some of his under 23 guys just to keep them with him, maybe, but like that's a bit of a risk too, because I mean he's already getting criticized when he hasn't even said a word yet, and like imagine him doing like, you know, picking like a third of his team being under. I can't really imagine that, but maybe that's an option. The question I have though is, does any of that really matter? Like, let's say Korea, I mean, they should win when they play in Korea against Thailand. And let's say they go to Thailand and it's a draw. It's actually like they're still pretty much securing their place in the final round of qualifying if they can manage 4 points in these 2 games. And if they lose one game like in Thailand, like you obviously don't want to put yourself in that position, but it's also not the worst thing. They're still in pretty good hands because they'd secure 9 points already. I've never been so unexcited about a Korea like national team game. It's because like, does any of this even really matter? Like, am I even really gonna watch? I mean, I'll probably watch, but like especially if they win the first game of these 2, like the first of these 2 games, like what does that second game even really mean? Under Paulo Bento, this does not happen. Under Shin Tae-yong, this does not happen. Look at how a football team operates. Most head coaches, they say, we'll have team dinner at 6 o'clock until 7. And it's just assumed that nobody leaves the room until 7 because that's considered a team dinner / meeting.